The average American family stores its fresh groceries the wrong way, and it costs them around $1,500 in wasted food every single year. But in millions of Japanese households, people have developed simple habits that make fresh groceries last up to 10 times longer, save hundreds of dollars a year, and create almost no waste at all. Some of these techniques are hundreds of years old, refined in kitchens that had no refrigerators and no plastic packaging, and they still outperform almost every modern storage product on the shelf today. Over the next few minutes, I am going to walk you through 21 of the most useful of these methods, including one that keeps onions firm and fresh for 6 months using nothing but a hook and a piece of mesh, and a 15-minute trick that brings limp, wilted vegetables back to life so completely you would swear they had just come home from the store. These are techniques you can start using tonight, and the first one is something most Americans do wrong the moment they walk in the door with their groceries, and it costs them more than they realize. Number 1 is called shiozuke, a simple salt and press method Japanese housewives have used for centuries to make cabbage, cucumber, and daikon last 3 to 4 times longer. You sprinkle a light coat of salt over the sliced vegetables, place a flat lid or wooden plate on top, and weigh it down with something heavy overnight. What the salt does is pull the water out of the vegetable through osmosis, and by morning a small pool of it has collected underneath the plate. That water is exactly what causes vegetables to rot, because bacteria needs moisture to grow, and wet vegetables sealed in a container turn slimy for that reason. By pulling that water out before storage, you remove the one thing rot depends on, and the vegetables stay firm and fresh for weeks instead of days. Sometimes the vegetable is already too far gone to salt, though, and most people throw it out without realizing there is another Japanese trick that can bring it right back to life. Number 2, a limp bunch of celery, a bag of tired greens, a floppy carrot. These are the vegetables most Americans scrape into the trash on a Sunday night before the grocery run. What the Japanese housewives understood is that a wilted vegetable is not a dead one. It has simply lost its water, and the cells inside are still perfectly intact. Give them back that water, and the vegetable comes right back to life. All you do is fill a deep bowl with cold water and ice, submerge the wilted vegetable for 15 to 20 minutes, and the cells drink the water back up until the whole thing is crisp and firm again. What looked like waste becomes fresh produce in the time it takes to unpack the rest of your groceries. The same instinct of treating food like it was still alive extended right into the ingredient most Americans wrap the tightest and kill the fastest. Number 3 is how you should be storing your cheese. Pull a block of cheddar out of the back of the fridge and you will often find it wet against its plastic film, slimy, and starting to smell sour. Cheese is a living food, still fermenting slowly even after you bring it home, and plastic wrap suffocates it. It traps the ammonia, gases the cheese naturally releases, and breeds mold against the rind. Cheesemakers themselves have recommended against plastic wrap for decades, and yet every grocery store on earth wraps their cheese in exactly that. Japanese households have always wrapped fermented dairy in wax or parchment paper instead, because paper lets the cheese breathe, keeps the rind dry, and preserves the flavor for weeks longer than plastic ever could. Number 4 involves nothing more than a piece of damp newspaper, and it works better than any plastic produce bag ever made. A Japanese housewife would wet a single sheet of newsprint under the tap, wring it out until it was only just damp, fold it loosely around a bunch of leafy greens, and set the whole bundle in a cool corner of the kitchen without any plastic or refrigeration at all. Every American seals leafy greens in plastic bags because they were told that plastic locks in freshness. But leafy greens are still respiring after harvest, and they release ethylene gas as they do it. A sealed plastic bag traps that ethylene, the concentration climbs, and it accelerates the rot it was supposed to prevent. Damp paper does the opposite by creating a humid but breathing microclimate that lets the ethylene escape while keeping the leaves from drying out. Greens stored this way last 2 to 3 times longer than greens sealed in plastic, and the housewife never owned a crisper drawer because she never needed one. The key was that she thought of the vegetable as an organism that needed the right conditions, not a product that needed to be locked away. And that same thinking extended to how she oriented her vegetables during storage. Number 5 is about the orientation of your vegetables, and it is something almost no one in the West ever considers. In a Japanese kitchen, you will often find a ceramic crock with a shallow inch of water in the bottom, and 3 carrots standing upright inside it, root end down, in the same orientation they had when they were still growing in the garden. Carrots, celery, leeks, asparagus, all of these vegetables grew vertically. And when we lay them flat in the crisper drawer, we are asking them to fight gravity for the rest of their post-harvest life. The Japanese housewives stood them upright in a jar or a crock with just enough water to touch the root end, and the vegetables stayed crisp for dramatically longer than the flat-stored version. Cell pressure stayed maintained because water was still being drawn up through the root. The cut end stayed minimally exposed to air, and the vegetable held its structure the way it was designed to. The refrigerator was designed around human convenience, with drawers and shelves that stack neatly, but she designed her storage around the vegetable itself, and the vegetable rewarded her for it. There is one vegetable in particular, though, that every American stores in exactly the wrong orientation every single day of their lives, and correcting it takes about 1 second. Number 6 is the tomato flip, and it is one of those tricks that sounds too small to matter until you actually try it. In a village kitchen in Japan, you would see a row of tomatoes on a wooden board, and every single one of them would be placed stem side down on a folded cloth. Not a single tomato is facing up, and there is a reason for that, which almost no American knows. The stem scar is the one place on a tomato that has no skin over it, because that is where the fruit was attached to the plant, and it is the primary entry point for both moisture loss and mold spores. When you store a tomato stem side up, which is the default in every American kitchen and every American grocery store, that opening faces the air and the tomato slowly loses moisture and picks up spores through it. When you flip it stem side down onto a cloth or a paper surface, the fruit's own weight creates a light seal against the scar, moisture loss slows dramatically, and mold has a much harder time getting a foothold. Every grocery store on earth stocks tomatoes stem up, and one flip when you get home is the entire instruction. The tomato is one of several vegetables the refrigerator itself is actively harming, which brings us to something the Japanese housewives understood without ever owning one. Number 7 is about mapping the cold spots in your own home, because every house already has a hidden refrigerator you do not know about. There is a thermal map to every house that most people have never bothered to read, a north-facing shelf that stays cool, a low cabinet near the floor that runs a few degrees below room temperature, a tile corner that never sees the sun. Japanese housewives who did not own refrigerators learned these cold spots the way you learn where the good light is in a room, and they assigned specific foods to specific spots based on what those foods actually needed. Tomatoes, cucumbers, and eggplant are 3 vegetables that are actively damaged by refrigerator cold, because below a certain temperature their cell walls break down and the texture is destroyed from the inside out. A cool but not cold spot in your kitchen is genuinely better for these vegetables than the crisper drawer. And once you start paying attention to where your house is naturally cooler, you will find spots you never noticed before. She did not fight the temperature of the house, she mapped it and she learned it. And she used what was already there instead of trying to force a single appliance to do the work of an entire microclimate. Before we keep going, I want to say something directly, because the pattern is important. These methods did not slowly fade out over time. They disappeared fast. And there was a reason for that. When refrigerators and plastic packaging became mass market products in the middle of the 20th century, the marketing did not just say that the new products were more convenient, it said the old methods were unsafe. Food safety language was used to discredit preservation techniques that had worked reliably for centuries, and the knowledge that lived in a housewife's hands was replaced by knowledge that lived on a box in a supermarket. A damp cloth around greens has no patent number, and a fermented rice bran bed cannot be sold in a package. So when the product arrived, nobody asked the person anymore. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is what happens when knowledge becomes unprofitable, and it is worth keeping in mind because the next several tricks were not forgotten by accident. Number 8 uses one apple to control the ripening of every other fruit around it. In a Japanese kitchen, you would often see a single ripe apple sitting deliberately in a wooden bowl full of green bananas, and it was not there for decoration, it was there as a tool. Ripe apples release ethylene gas, the same gas that greens release as they respire, and ethylene is the natural chemical signal that tells nearby fruit to ripen. Japanese housewives use this on purpose, placing a single ripe apple next to green bananas, hard avocados, or unripe pears when they needed those fruits to ripen faster in a controlled and predictable way. When the target fruit began to turn, the apple was removed, and the process stopped exactly when they wanted it to. This is one of the few methods where you are working with the natural chemistry of the fruit rather than against it, and it lets you buy underripe produce on sale in time it's ripening to when you actually plan to eat it. The same principle that produce is constantly speaking to the air around it through gases and moisture also meant that the drawers your vegetables sat in were doing invisible work that most people never notice. Number 9 is lining your drawers with newspaper, and it is one of those free tricks that outperforms almost anything you can buy. A traditional Japanese kitchen would have a wooden vegetable drawer lined flat with old newsprint, and every Tuesday the paper would be pulled out and replaced with a fresh sheet. It costs nothing, and it takes about 10 seconds, and it does more work than any product you can buy for the same purpose. Newsprint is porous and absorbent, which means it pulls excess moisture away from the produce sitting on top of it, and it also gives ethylene gas somewhere to go instead of pooling in the bottom of the drawer. Your grandparents called this Tuesday, and we call it a life hack, and most modern kitchens still line their crisper drawers with nothing at all. It is the kind of intervention that disappeared fastest because it was never attached to a product, and there is nothing to buy, so nobody had a reason to teach you about it. Paper did the same quiet work for one of the most abused ingredients in the entire American supermarket, which most people bring home and destroy within days. Number 10 is how to store mushrooms. And if you have ever pulled a slimy tray of them out of your fridge, you already know why this matters. Mushrooms come home from the grocery store sealed in a plastic clamshell, and that clamshell is the exact wrong environment for them because it concentrates the moisture that mushrooms naturally release right against their own surface. Within a few days, the plastic tray is weeping condensation. The mushrooms are slick and slimy, and you throw the whole thing in the trash wondering what went wrong. Japanese households have always stored mushrooms in folded paper parcels kept in a cool and airy spot because mushrooms need to breathe just like any other produce, and airflow matters as much as temperature. The paper wicks away the moisture that would otherwise pool against the surface, and the mushrooms stay firm and dry for well over a week instead of collapsing in 3 days. She stored them like they were still alive because they were, and the same instinct applied when it came time to store the vegetables that needed to last, not days, but months. Number 11 is hanging your onions and garlic, and it can extend their shelf life by close to 10 times. In a Japanese village home, you would find a woven mesh sack of onions hanging from a hook in a cool shaded corner, and 6 months later those onions would still be firm, still dry, and still perfectly good to cook with. Onions and garlic stored in any container where they rest against a surface will rot from the bottom. Because moisture accumulates at the contact point, the dry outer skin breaks down, and within 2 weeks you have that familiar mess of mold and soft spots. Japanese households solved this by hanging their onions and garlic from ceiling hooks in cool shaded spots, using woven mesh or netting that allowed full airflow on all sides. The dry outer skin, which is the onion's only natural defense against decay, stayed dry and intact because nothing was pressing against it. Onions stored this way last 4 to 6 months, which is roughly 10 times longer than most Americans ever manage to keep them, and the entire system costs about $2 for a mesh bag and a hook. Something worth stopping on for a moment is that the produce, which spoils the fastest, meaning bagged salads, pre-cut vegetables, and mushrooms in plastic trays, is also the produce with the highest retail margins in the entire grocery store. I am not saying anyone designed a system specifically to waste your food, but the packaging, the storage conditions, and the point of sale environment all consistently favor replacement frequency over longevity. A method that keeps onions fresh for 6 months means you buy onions less often, and the knowledge that eliminates waste also eliminates certain repeat purchases. It was not suppressed by malice. It simply stopped being taught because there was no commercial incentive to teach it, and the housewives who knew the methods were replaced in the household economy by the products on the shelf. Number 12 is a rice vinegar rinse for berries, and it is the reason Japanese households can keep strawberries fresh for 2 weeks instead of 4 days. All you do is fill a shallow bowl with 1 part rice vinegar and 3 parts cold water. Dip the berries in briefly, drain them, and dry them on a clean cloth before storing them in the fridge. 2 weeks later, those berries are still firm and still bright, when the ones from your last grocery run turn to fuzz within days. Berries go bad not when you get them home, but on the way there, because invisible mold spores are already present on the skin the moment you bring the container through the door. Japanese housewives understood that you had to handle the invisible population of spores before refrigerating, and a brief rinse in diluted rice vinegar handles that with almost no effort. Acetic acid disrupts mold spore germination at very low concentrations, and as long as you dry the fruit fully before storage, there is no vinegar flavor left behind at all. She cleaned what could not be seen, and that is what made the difference between 2 weeks of good berries and 4 days of mold. Sometimes the enemy was not a spore on a surface, but a gas in the air, and the answer to that one was buried in a Japanese root cellar with something you would not expect. Number 13 is the charcoal trick, and it is the one a food company reportedly tried and failed to disprove. In a rural Japanese root cellar, you would find small, blackened pieces of wood charcoal tucked into the corners, silent and ancient, doing the work of a machine that had not been invented yet. Charcoal has a dense and highly porous surface, and that surface absorbs ethylene gas from the air while simultaneously regulating humidity, which are the two main enemies of stored produce. It does this passively and continuously for months before the charcoal needs replacing, and the practice was reliable enough that traditional Japanese root cellars have been studied as a model for low-energy food storage. Commercially sold ethylene absorbers exist today, and they can be surprisingly expensive. Yet studies on activated carbon and wood charcoal have repeatedly confirmed what Japanese households figured out centuries ago, that small pieces of natural wood charcoal placed in your pantry, your crisper drawer, or your vegetable box will absorb ethylene and buffer humidity for months at almost no cost. Once you understand that food is constantly speaking to the air around it, you start to see how even something as small as leaving a pit inside an avocado can add days to how long it stays green. Number 14 is why you should never remove the pit from a leftover avocado. If you cut an avocado in half and store one half with the pit still nestled inside its cavity, wrapped loosely in a cotton cloth, the flesh will still be green a day later, when the half that had its pit removed and was wrapped in plastic wrap is already brown and slimy. The instinct in most American kitchens is to remove the pit and throw it away, but the pit was doing a job while it was inside the fruit, and removing it exposes the maximum possible surface area to oxygen. Leaving the pit in place physically blocks a huge portion of the exposed flesh from air, and the seed itself creates a slightly acidic microclimate around it that further slows the oxidation. Japanese housewives stored any leftover half of a fruit with its core, seed, or pit still in place, and they wrapped it in cloth rather than pressing plastic against the exposed flesh. The pit is not waste. It is a biological lid built by the fruit itself, and she left it in because it was doing a job. Number 15 is how to actually freeze vegetables, because the way you freeze a vegetable determines almost everything about how it tastes when it comes out. Most Americans get this wrong the moment they bring a bag of produce home from the store. Dumping vegetables straight into a bag and freezing them as a dense clump creates large ice crystals, and those large crystals physically rupture the cell walls of the vegetable as they form. When you thaw that vegetable months later, it collapses into gray mush, and you blame the vegetable when you should really blame the freezing method. Japanese housewives laid their vegetables flat in a single thin layer on a tray before freezing them, and only after the individual pieces were frozen, solid, did they transfer everything into a flat-pressed bag. Rapid surface freezing creates much smaller ice crystals, and small crystals leave the cell walls intact, so the vegetable comes out on the other side with its texture and color preserved. The difference between food that bounces back and food that collapses on thaw is decided almost entirely in those first few hours in the freezer, and even a flat and thin freeze cannot save a vegetable whose enzymes are still active when it goes in. Number 16 is blanching before freezing, and 90 seconds of your time can buy you 3 extra months of good frozen vegetables. All you do is bring a pot of water to a boil, drop your vegetables in for 60 to 90 seconds, and then plunge them straight into a bowl of ice water to stop the cooking instantly. When the broccoli or beans or leafy greens come out of that ice bath, the color is actually brighter than when it went in, and the vegetable is now ready to be frozen for months without losing anything. Every vegetable contains enzymes that stay active even at freezer temperatures, and those enzymes slowly cause color loss, flavor breakdown, and vitamin degradation over the weeks and months that the vegetable sits frozen. Blanching denatures those enzymes in under 2 minutes and stops that internal clock completely. Unblanched vegetables go gray and flavorless within about a month in the freezer, while blanched vegetables come out 3 months later with color and flavor almost identical to fresh. 90 seconds of boiling water was all it took, and she was buying herself 3 months of good food with a single small step. A similar trick applied when she was storing a cut vegetable in the refrigerator rather than the freezer, and it involved even less effort than blanching did. Number 17 is brushing oil onto cut vegetable surfaces, and it is one of those tricks that takes half a second and buys you 4 extra days. If you cut a squash or a pumpkin in half and drag a small brush dipped in neutral oil once across the exposed orange flesh before storage, that oiled surface will not oxidize, will not dry out, and will not develop the tough, leathery layer that ruins the cut face within a day or two. A thin film of neutral oil acts as a continuous oxygen barrier with no air pockets underneath, which is something plastic wrap pressed against a cut vegetable can never actually achieve because there are always tiny gaps trapping air against the surface. Japanese housewives brushed a light coat of oil onto any cut vegetable surface as a finishing step before storage, and they did it as instinctively as you might cover a bowl with a lid. A half second with an oiled finger, and she was buying herself 4 more days of a vegetable that would have otherwise dried out overnight, and the same instinct of the smallest possible action producing the largest possible extension applied to the most common food in almost every American refrigerator as well. Number 18 is how to store your eggs. In a traditional Japanese kitchen, you would find a shallow wooden tray holding a dozen eggs, and every single one would be sitting with the wide end pointing up. There is a reason for that, and it comes down to something inside the shell that most people never think about. Every egg has a small pocket of air trapped at its wide end, and that air pocket is what keeps the yolk floating safely in the center of the shell. When the egg sits wide end up, the air pocket stays where it is supposed to be, and the yolk stays suspended in the middle, protected from the shell walls. When the egg gets tipped onto its side or flipped upside down, the air pocket shifts, the yolk drifts toward the shell, and the egg starts going bad much faster than it should. This is where the modern kitchen quietly gets it wrong. Most refrigerators come with egg trays built into the door that hold the eggs on their sides. And the moment people finish a carton, they transfer their eggs into those side-lying trays or into a bowl, and the correct orientation is lost. The egg was laid in the right position, and the fridge door put it in the wrong one. The last few tricks are ones almost nobody has ever heard, because they involve using natural materials to protect food in ways the modern kitchen has completely forgotten. Number 19 is packing root vegetables in sand or straw, and it can carry them through an entire winter without a single spoiled potato. In Japanese village households, root vegetables were packed into wooden boxes between alternating layers of dry straw or fine sand, and they would stay firm and fresh for months at a time. Straw and sand are both passive humidity regulators, and when the ambient humidity in the storage space rises, they absorb it, and when it drops, they release it slowly back into the air. This keeps the narrow humidity range that root vegetables need in order to stay firm, and it does it without any electricity or any active management on your part. Researchers studying low-energy food storage have cited Japanese root sellers using exactly this method as a functional model for the future. She put the earth back around the root, and of course it worked, because the vegetable had spent its entire life buried in something very similar. Sand in a wooden box in your basement or garage will keep carrots, potatoes, and beets firm all the way through winter, and it costs almost nothing to set up. Number 20 is storing ginger in miso, sake, or rice vinegar, and it is a trick that both preserves the ginger and improves it at the same time. In a Japanese kitchen, you might find a small ceramic jar of miso sitting on a wooden shelf, and buried inside that salty fermented paste is a whole knob of fresh ginger. 2 months later, that ginger is pulled out, and it is not only still fresh, but actually more fragrant and complex than it was on the day it went in. Ginger stored in the refrigerator dries out within about 2 weeks and starts to lose its bright, sharp character, but ginger submerged in miso, sake, or rice vinegar can last for months and improve in flavor the whole time it waits. This is one of the clearest examples of a principle that runs through the entire Japanese kitchen tradition, which is that preservation and flavor development were never treated as separate goals. The method extended the life of the ginger while also making it taste better, and she never had to choose between keeping something fresh and improving it. The very last trick is the one that genuinely stopped me the first time I heard it, because it involves throwing away less of a vegetable you thought you already knew how to handle. Number 21 is leaving the fibrous pulp inside your cut pumpkin or squash, and it can add days to how long the cut face stays fresh. When you have a kabocha or a butternut and scoop out only the seeds, leaving the stringy fibrous pulp behind and pressing it back against the cut orange face like a wet bandage, you are letting the vegetable protect itself the way it was designed to. Every time you scoop a squash or a pumpkin completely clean, you are throwing away the one thing the plant made specifically to protect itself. That fibrous pulp around the seeds contains phenolic compounds that have documented antimicrobial properties, and research on cucurbit seed pulp has since confirmed exactly what Japanese housewives understood by observation alone. They removed only the seeds, and they left the surrounding fibrous layer in place, pressing it back against the cut face before storage so that the plant's own natural defense continued to protect the flesh from mold and drying. The squash built its own bandage, and she simply did not remove it, which meant her cut squash lasted days longer than the version that had been scraped completely clean in the modern kitchen. So there you have it, 21 Japanese methods that can dramatically extend how long your fresh groceries last, cut your food waste, and save you hundreds of dollars a year. Start with just a few of these this week: the salt press for your cabbage, the ice water bath for your wilted greens, and within a month you will notice it in your grocery bill and in how much less food you are throwing away. Let me know in the comments which of these tricks you are trying first, and click on the video appearing on your screen right now, and I will see you in my next video.